Hey everyone, it's Robin from the Shop Stool Podcast. Unfortunately, I had a bit of trouble with my audio this week, so I'm not going to be on the show, but Joey and Bryan did a fantastic job of keeping it going, so big thanks to them. This is also the first episode this season where we have a guest for you, so I want to say a very big welcome to Julian McCartney. How are you this evening?
I'm well, thanks Robin. Thank you for having me.
So for the people out there who don't know who you are, could you just give us an idea of what you do, and maybe we'll get into the history of how you got to this point?
Well, I'm a furniture maker by trade. I have a business called Glencross Furniture. I'm based in Melbourne, in a suburb called Thomastown. That's where my workshop is, and it's in the northeast of Melbourne, probably 15 to 20 k's out of the city. I make bespoke fine furniture and work with clients to create unique items that tell a story.
Awesome.
That's the general sort of pitch, but sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, so can you tell us a little bit, maybe how long you've been running the business as it is now?
Yep.
And then how did you stumble your way to get to starting said business?
Sorry, I was just distracted by we've lost Robin, I think.
He's looking
stuff. How did I get started? I back in 2006, I did an apprenticeship I haven't done this for a while actually, so I'll sort of get there. I'd been doing a few things up until sort of 2006. As you know, I'd travelled a bit. I'd been in and out of some university courses, and I decided to sort of change the tack as to where I wanted to go with things. And after I'd been overseas for a couple of years and worked with some craftspeople in Canada and things like that, I came home and I just was trying to figure out what can I do where I can work with my hands, I can use creative outlets and feel like I've created something from start to finish, and sort of be part of the in-between, the beginning, the in-between and the end sort of thing. And I realised that sort of furniture as part of people's lives was an area that I'd really like to get into, and I had a particular interest in sort of the historical side of it, the tradition of furniture and the craft and everything. So I found a pre-apprenticeship at RMIT in the Melbourne CBD, and I did that. And after a few months, one of my tutors there sort of realised that at that stage I was mid-20s, and they could see I was a bit keener than some of the younger people there, so he put me forward for an apprenticeship, and I finished that a little bit early and went into the antique side of the trade. So my early sort of learnings and everything as an apprentice was antique restoration and reproduction. So creating antique style pieces to make them look like they're hundreds of years old, and all traditional joinery and all that sort of stuff. So that was an area that I really wanted to get into and sort of get into the guts of taking stuff apart and understanding how it's made, and then hopefully apply that to, becoming a better maker.
Did you get to work with like ye olde mahogany and stuff, or when
Yep.
you say when you say it was made to look like it was old, was it just built in the ye olde fashion, or did you actually kind of, for want of a better term, like distress it?
Yeah, there was, and that can be a can of worms topic when it comes to the idea of distressing timbers and being convincing in that sort of field. So, we worked with mahoganies, all the premium cabinet timbers you get from America, all your oaks and walnuts and cherries and things like that. And some European timbers, and some things that we milled ourselves from locally grown trees, and then like we have a lot of European oaks and sycamores and elms and things in Melbourne, so sometimes you get your hands on stuff like that. So it was a matter of taking the timbers that would have been used in those types of things, like provincial furniture from France and the UK and all that sort of stuff, using timbers that were traditional to that sort of age of furniture, and then making it with all your mortise and tenon dovetail stuff, and then going through the aging process. So you kind of do a manipulated aging process on timbers, and that could involve staining or oxidizing timber, and then distressing it, like belting it around a bit. But so it was interesting though. I'd like to think I was fortunate in that I worked with people early on that did it the right way, not the wrong way, but everyone did it differently. Some people would distress furniture, just hit it everywhere and say, okay, that looks like it's old. We were very sort of scientific. Like, my boss is very particular about, if you're going to distress something, it's got to be distressed where it would be normally distressed.
Yeah.
So if it was a dresser, which might be like a sideboard looking thing that had sort of a few drawers across the front and turned legs or whatever, you'd imagine if someone had fingernails around where the drawer pulls were going to be, and over 100 years, what would happen to the area around that. And when you eventually put brass handles on, like, how does the dirt gather around the handles? And then everything was sort of French polished, like, so it's mostly shellac finished and wax and stuff like that. So
would he get you to put some false nails on and just like scratch away at it? Is that the?
Yeah, that was. Oh man, you should have seen that. It was like having a set of torture tools or something like that in the workshop. It was all like, chains attached to sticks and even.
Really?
But bags of old keys and stuff like that, like proper skeleton key type things. And so as much as possible, like, you're sort of trying to be innovative with what you use for that. But a lot of the time you try and use legitimate stuff, like, bits of nail and things like that were actually from cabinets that have been destroyed and pulled apart and left, my old boss had jars of all kinds of, original parts and things. And so that was a very influential time, being able to pull that sort of stuff apart. We were based in Hawkesburn Village, which is sort of Toorak in Melbourne. It's quite an affluent area, good clientele for that kind of work. A lot of people have big mansions and things like that with a mixture of antique furniture and modern things and whatever. So it was sort of to have we had a shop front and then a small workshop at the back of it, kind of in Hawkesburn Village. Was kind of a busy little, cosmopolitan sort of area. So you bring clients in and they'd love to smell like the wax and see what was going on out the back, and you're hand planing things and chiseling things and whatever. And it is almost like, going to a country workshop in the UK somewhere probably. But so yeah. So
how did you break away, so to speak, and decide that you're going to undercut your boss?
Yeah. Well, I guess there was a point where, I finished my apprenticeship and I hung around for a little bit, but it was physically a small space, but also just the challenge with being in the industry from the ground up is that from a career point of view, it's very hard you don't just jump, like, if I could compare it to other trades, say like a licensed trade, plumbing and electrical or whatever, you have sort of stages where your income increases significantly. That's not the case as a cabinet maker, unless you're in a very high volume space. So some of the kids that I went to trade school with worked in family businesses doing kitchens and things like that, maybe shop fitting. And in those volume environments, there's a potential for your career stuff to jump. But anyway, so I sort of wanted to move out from that and just get a bit more experience in more modern business in the furniture field, like in Melbourne. Like, who's successful in the furniture field in Melbourne? And I ended up going to, I went overseas for a little bit again, just had a break, and then I came back and I'm like, all right, who's out there? And I found Tate Furniture, who you guys might be familiar with. Bryan, you're probably familiar with through architecture and stuff. They've been they mostly do sort of outdoor furniture, mostly steel, but they do a lot of aluminium work and stuff now, and powder coated stuff. It's nice designer furniture for outdoor use, and they'd been operating in Melbourne for about 20 years by the time I went and worked for them. And I just wanted to see from the inside how you do modern furniture and survive as a business. And so I got to learn some welding. I'd done a bit of welding when I worked for Robert Brown, was who I used to work for in the antique field. And we used to do everything, strip machines, all the whatever you can imagine, and learned how to weld and stuff. But I did that more in a modern sort of way with Tate, got to meet different types of clients, did some delivery, did some assembly. And then...
I've seen the welding jigs at Tate are amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely
They were very good at adopting modern techniques, like getting laser cut parts so they could make jigs very accurately and stuff. Whereas, as all you guys know, when you're banging together jigs, sometimes they can be so rudimentary and brutal in what they end up being just to get like one job done. But they always sort of invested in, because they did runs of stuff. You're doing a lot of chairs for a university or something like that. You want the jigs to be bang on. It's super precise work, and their quality was really good. So there was a lot of stuff to pick up in that environment. And then at the same time, this is about late 2012, early 2013, and we'd moved to Fitzroy, which is inner city Melbourne. My wife and I had moved there, and I decided to try and find a workshop space to try and start doing some of my own stuff, because our previous place, we'd been doing I'd worked under a carport in spare time and just used little bits and pieces of timber and stuff to make stuff for markets and everything, and eventually got a shared workshop space in Collingwood technically, and I was sharing with another maker, Tara Wilcox from Red Fox and Wilcox, who has a furniture business in Melbourne, and just sort of start to network around the area, like get to know. I had a lot of interest in people who were working in food and hospitality and stuff, so a lot of the earlier networking and work that I did was through the people that I met at local restaurants and cafes, and and in the meantime you're trying to get commissions through people and get on. The social media thing was sort of happening. Instagram was sort of starting to blow up a bit, so you're trying to get a presence on Instagram, and and I think I just wanted to develop myself as take the skills that I had and just use them in different ways. So more contemporary stuff, and still do a bit of restoration things here and there, but I think I've always wanted to, and I still do today, taken what I knew from a traditional point of view and that fine furniture knowledge, and just tried to apply it to the things that you don't necessarily expect. Like, you don't have to necessarily see all of that sort of stuff happening, but it is always happening. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes. I came from a similar approach, I think. Certainly that was my intention, to combine traditional type mentality to more modern design. I think I've let that slip a lot, just because when you're asked to make some things, there's just no room for traditional. You just have to kind of throw all of that old stuff out the window, because what the client wants just doesn't fit. But and I find that happens more and more, actually, especially now where I'm doing more cabinets. There's a lot of just, no, you can't build that way, so we're just going to use plywood.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest challenges, because it was a real shift in going from doing things the way that I had done and working for someone else. When you first start doing stuff for yourself, you get this kind of false confidence, or even before that, still working for someone else, you kind of, there's little stages you go through of thinking, I could totally build a 3 meter tall break front cabinet with 16 drawers and 6 sets of glass windows or whatever. And because you kind of do one under the tutelage of someone and in their workshop with all the gear. And then you get into you're trying to start a business, you got bugger all good tools. Like, there's my hand tools and stuff, but I didn't have any big power tools really. Like, just a few, like a lathe and a little table saw and stuff, but it was pretty dodgy. Didn't have a thicknesser for a while and a decent buzzer, and you've got to be a little bit innovative in that at that point. And then so when it comes to also trying to adapt to like more modern styles of furniture, like you said, you start working with maybe plywood or joining things in a different way to create a modern form, and you do have to like relearn the trade in a lot of ways, or just continue to learn the trade, which is something I think you always do anyway. But
it's interesting what you said before when you say, I can make that giant 3 meter tall your break front desk or whatever, but like you say, there's a mentor there with you, and because they're there as like a backstop, you don't actually run through every detail about how you're going to do it. It's not all in your mind. It's a combination of you and your mentor. And so when it's finally just you looking at this 3 meter wide hole in the wall that should be a desk, and you go, how do you actually do the start part where I never did that before? Suddenly it's all on you, and it's all risk, because then you go, oh shit, someone just gave me 20 grand to build this thing, and can I actually pull it off? Like, you start really doubting yourself at that point.
Absolutely. Planning, I guess, has a lot to do that, and trying to figure out what are your processes. But also, when every job is custom, and technically, even if it's a really utilitarian, because I've got stuff that I do that is, I guess, more of a unique design, and then there's the stuff that is very utilitarian sort of stuff. And regardless of whatever those things are, you're still designing it in some way from the ground up. You've got to source all the materials and all that sort of stuff. Every single time that you do that, there's not necessarily a fixed process for every piece that you make, unless you start doing products or whatever. So you realise pretty quickly, like, where your time's going and whether you're pricing things properly or whatever. And,
pricing is a fun one.
Yeah, I've listened to your podcast for a while, and I've heard the conversations, and there's been plenty of head nodding at my end when I've heard some of your stories, Joey, and Bryan as well. I've had a few chats with Bryan over the years, it never gets old. It comes part and parcel. And I was saying to Bryan the other day, actually, just that there's this sadistic, I don't know if it's masochist, sadistic, or whatever. There's this thing about you love the variation in what you do, but then you're constantly in pain because you're like, why do I keep doing this? Shouldn't I just design 3 pieces and just start flogging those for the rest of my life? But I think there's I know for me, I really enjoy interacting with the client, and especially the brainstorming stage, and hopefully being somewhat collaborative with them. I like seeing people get excited when you sort of solve a problem for them, and that's what drives a lot of the stuff that I make. I really want it to be quite personal to somebody, so it's not... You might make a piece that is really just for that person. It's not necessarily going to be for the next person.
Yeah.
But there's often details that you can take.
Yeah, things that you learn through the process of making that odd piece for one person that will then inform further designs.
Oh, totally. And it's more and more, and I think I've become more aware of it. I find myself going to certain details that have become more consistent and saying, hey, what about if we put this in here? Or, how we were talking about this thing. Here's actually a couple of examples of how that could work. And that actually is a really helpful way it takes a bit of weight off your shoulders in the process, I think, too, because you've got that existing confidence of having done something before and knowing how it's worked in a design or whatever.
Knowing that you have A, B, and C up your sleeve, and when the client asks for F, you can go, hey, we've done this before, and I know this works. You're asking for something that's a little bit outside the scope of what I know works.
Yep.
So, here's your choice. We can go and take a little bit of risk and do it the way you want, or we can do it this other way where I know it's going to work. And I usually say I want to take the risk if you're willing, I'm willing, but it could be all bad news next week.
Yeah, look, there's definitely times when you go, oh, we could totally do this. Like, you don't want to be that tradesperson or whatever that goes, no, it'll be fine. Don't worry, I've done this a million times. And because I've heard that from people before, and I know, I'm like, when they're saying it, I'm like, this isn't going to work. But you find yourself sometimes doing that. You're like, it'll be fine. And then you go and start drawing something up, and you're like, oh, this wood is not going to be able to move a certain way, or or we might just lose the detail because it's going to be hidden behind something, or what, I don't know. You do learn to try and choose your words carefully, but sometimes you just get excited in the moment.
Yeah, that can be when problems arise, huh? You spit something out and you're like, I shouldn't have said that. Because now I'm down the track,
Totally.
You're pretty much only Aussie timbers, aren't you, Julian?
No? I do. Depending on what it is, like I lean towards a lot of Aussie timbers. Like, if you were going to pick the top 2 Aussie timbers that I use, they tend to be like either Blackwood, which could be from Tassie, or I've got a guy that, if you know Liam Ratton from down in, he's near Dalesford, and they slab. He works sort of alongside Pete Curley a bit.
Yeah, Pete Curley.
So they source a bit of timber down the Otways and often come back with these beautiful Blackwoods. So I get some slabs off him sometimes. But so I love Blackwood. It's always been one of my favourite timbers. And that goes really nicely with Tassie oak. So those sort of lighter coloured mountain ash kind of eucalypts that we have. I've always had I've been drawn to recycled timber in some way forever, because early on I could get my hands on it pretty cheap. Like, I'd either find it, or a carpenter buddy would say, hey, do you want this trailer load? And I'd be like, yeah. I still use it if it's appropriate, but it's not super common in my work. But yeah, if the right person comes along, for sure. I collect it. I've still got racks of it, but it takes up a lot of space.
It's annoying to have. I've got a small collection of recycled timber, only because it was kind of just forced on me, but because it's great timber, there's nothing wrong with it apart from it's got holes all through it, and trying to find a piece where that actually is going to suit and really complement the piece is very difficult. Even if somebody says, I don't mind the holes all over it, it's kind of going to look a bit crap.
It depends, I guess. Usually if somebody wants recycled timber, especially from, Australian homes, especially a lot of the Melbourne homes, were traditionally built with hardwood frames. And it's all sort of like a mixed bag of eucalypt varieties. So there's sort of, eucalypts are sort of notorious for having these crossbred species, and so all this sort of your black butts and stringy barks and messmates, or whatever people have called them from the mills over the years, they often get sort of mixed up, and we have these incredibly dense timbers that come out of houses, and a lot of them with gum pockets and things like that. But apart from that, they've got nail holes, and if people want recycled timber, they usually are aware that there's going to be these characteristics.
Yeah.
But not everyone is aware of the work that goes into processing those materials. So,
how would you approach that with the client? I mean, because I get that a lot, and I still don't really know how to explain to someone that it's way cheaper to buy new timber, which is more expensive, than to try and pick through a stack of nail-ridden timber.
Well, there's a couple of ways. One, when I used to not process the material myself, which would require me to sort of de-nail things, remachine it, all that sort of stuff, I would use probably one of our favourite suppliers, Brian knows very well, Urban Salvage, and you've spoken to Andy Manure before, and they've always processed recycled timbers really well, so they sell dressed all round timbers, and that just takes it's more expensive, but it takes processes out of processing the material, so you can sort of go in there and maybe just sort of remachine the edges or whatever before you join them and stuff, but they've always machined stuff beautifully as well, so from a recycled material point of view, that can help, but it still costs a lot. And if I do it myself, like, I don't know, look, the main problem is usually when someone comes to you and goes, oh, can you just make it out of recycled timber because I don't want to spend that much or something, and you're like, well, it's going to cost you more. And if they get past the point of you saying this is roughly how much something like this will cost, and they're like, okay, all right, so what are our other options? And one of the handy ones I've used is using wormy chestnut, which is like a stringy bark kind of variety that has a lot of pinhole in it.
Would you ever get it in New Zealand, Joey? You ever see wormy chestnut?
No, I've never seen it. I've only seen it on Aussie Makers. I saw it at I think I saw it at that wood. What's it called?
At the
Mullaney Wood Show.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I saw it there.
Yeah, look, it's pretty much just often very similar tones to sort of Tassie oak, that sort of biscuity brown, that kind of stuff, just with a bit more character, and it does often look like recycled timber, thanks to the pinholes and the thin gum vein and stuff like that. So I would often suggest that, because rough sawn, I could get that at a more reasonable price, but I still have to process it and make, as you've probably discussed before, like, there is the raw material aspect of the jobs, but the reality is a lot of the time that the money's going into the labour and the expertise. Unless you're using like really exotic, expensive stuff, or going into sort of the premium cabinet timbers like walnut and stuff, which is 10,000 plus a cubic metre, or rare mahoganies and things like that, or whatever, but so there's always a bit of that. It's not just about the material cost, and I think some people just go automatically to that, and you're like, oh, by the way, this is how much I value my time as well, and that's going to go on top of all that sort of.
That is an interesting. That's an interesting point when you say to somebody, look, I can make you your dining table out of oak just like you wanted. It's going to cost this much, and they say, oh, that's great, but it's a little bit over budget. How much if we make it out of pine? Usually they'll say. And I'm like, well, okay, there is a cost difference between oak and pine, but do you want to know how much the labour aspect of the job is? It's like, 75%, especially in the dining table. There's bugger all timber in it. Yeah, it's just it's labour.
I get asked that a lot as well. Like with clients, they'll come in. They'll ask what timbers you work with. You show them a variety of samples, and they'll be like, "Oh, what's the price difference between doing it in blackbutt versus doing it in Vic Ash?" And I'm like, "Well, across the whole piece, you're probably talking about $400 on an $8,000 piece." And they're like, "Oh, right, okay." And they get really hung up on the idea of cutting the material is going to save them money, but in reality, it's not. It's either got to be simplifying the design or scaling the whole piece down.
It'd be interesting if they ever said to you, "Oh, could you just do a shit job?"
I just won't sand the inside of it. The outside will look great.
Don't sand the bottom of the table. That'd be fine.
Oh, totally. The other thing is that it's not even just about material change a lot of the time too, because you might change to pine and say, for instance, the pine costs less and it weighs a bit less too, so maybe it's not as laborious to move. But the cost to say, what if there's a stain involved, right? And staining pine takes a different process to staining like Vic Ash. It takes the stain differently and you prepare it a bit differently. So then you're adding the cost somewhere else. And also pines say more likely to get dinted or whatever. So what's the contingency? Like if I'm dinting it and ironing the bloody surface constantly to try and raise the dint or something, like have I allowed for that? Like, so I think those conversations with clients, it's a constant learning process, but you definitely refine over time how much, and it's different from person to person, but how much do I tell them about the really finer details of something, and how much do I say it in a way that gives them confidence in, especially if you're going ahead with the project, gives them the confidence in what you're doing. But then the person that you've kind of got to say, look, we just probably aren't going to work together. Like, how do you say that? Because I try to give everyone the courtesy, an equal courtesy, unless they're being rude or something. But so you sort of have to figure out some rounded terminology. Yeah, you got to round the corners off on the sort of okay, see you later kind of thing. And but that's all part of it. There's lots of great advice out there about how you need to get better at saying no, and that can bring more yeses to you or something. And but it does work a bit here and there.
Do you not find usually the best way to get rid of those people is just to add a zero onto the price?
Yeah. Just for shits and giggles.
And then worst case, they say yes, and you're like, oh, wow, now this job's profitable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny actually. I did a bit of work later last year with a business coach, and we just sort of had a meeting every couple of weeks, and it was really useful because I'd tried this once a few years ago and hadn't really gelled with somebody else, and then had been talking with someone recently, and I sort of asked her if she would help with some coaching sort of stuff, and if anything, it was just really great to. Like a job came up like that, Brian, where I was like, I really want to do this. It was coming up to Christmas, but I'm like, my schedule is pretty hectic, and for me to do this, it has to be worth my while. And she's like, well, why don't you just increase what you're going to quote it for, and probably bring it up to where it should be anyway. But it was sort of due time for that, and so I kind of put out a higher number, and they came back and said, yeah, let's do it. And I felt way better about it straight away.
Yeah, you feel motivated.
Yeah, totally. And it had to happen pretty quickly. So I was just like, okay, this is happening. Bang, let's go do it. And I'm a bit of a sporadic worker anyway, and it was also a job doing some products that it was a corporate job where I was doing these serving boards that I've done for years since I
remember seeing those on your.
Yeah, you probably saw
Yeah.
They had painted handles and some like laser work and stuff like that. And so there's a bit involved, but I know the process quite well.
Yep.
And so knowing that I'd quoted properly to cover the hecticness of it and the size of it, I felt way better about it rather than just tearing my hair out. And I left that to the other jobs that I'd already quoted and was trying to finish at that time. But yeah, it's amazing how those. Look, at the end of the day, it's business, and how much the costings and the client relationships affect you in the workshop. Yeah, it's just one big sort of.
How many kind of jobs are you juggling at any given time to actually make your work for you? Because I know that I can't just go on one job at a time. It just doesn't work money-wise. I've got to have at least two things happening.
Yeah. Look, it's always, I think, it's a changing thing, what the capacity looks like. But usually when it's sort of ticking along nicely, there's one or two, for me, that are like medium to largish jobs. And then, or like I'll say a couple of premium jobs, and then usually a couple of little things like little in-betweeny jobs that might be sub-$1,000 type jobs, Yep. And it could be a small item, it could be an improvement on something, it might be a repair, it could be anything like that.
You still do a bit of restoration work, don't you? I saw there was was it a Featherstone chair or something that you were restoring, or what was it?
No, I reckon if I had... I used to have a small set of Mitzi Featherston chairs, but they were kind of like a very run-of-the-mill. If I had a Featherston, I'd probably keep it for myself.
Did I not see it on your Instagram last week that you were restoring a chair? I thought it was a Featherston. I must have got that wrong.
Last week, I'm not sure. I'm modifying and sort of restoring a dining table at the moment. So it's a good example of a family's had a table in the house for 20 years or so. Someone else made it. That person doesn't make furniture anymore. Can I cut it down to a slightly smaller table because they're downsized a bit, and refinish it and da-da-da. And it ends up being sort of a similar amount of time to making a new table. Mm-hmm. But I'm working with pretty much 100% of the materials that are already there. So, right. This table has narrow breadboard ends, and because I'm cutting the table down, I've cut those breadboard ends off. But the person who made it before did it in a really weird way. So I've had to kind of like redo those, and the table surface is all a bit funny. And anyway, like I quite like those types of jobs, but they can sort of drag out a bit, and they take
very
up
difficult
space.
To price those things.
It is a bit, yeah.
I always kind of recoil when somebody says, "Can you just quickly cut the end of the table off?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not really that easy, especially some tables are just built so strangely that as soon as you put a saw to it, the thing just falls to bits. It's so much variety.
Well, it's like renovating a house, when you take a wall down and you're like, oh, I didn't realise that it had it was partly supporting this structure that really shouldn't be the way it is. And so they can be challenging, those sorts of things, but it's also I get drawn into those jobs too because I love the sentiment behind it, and that thing has a special part in their life. So, but it can be tricky if somebody comes to you and they've bought a chair at a flea market or something, and they spent $20 on it, and they're like, "Oh, can you repair the legs and refinish it? And I'm going to get it reupholstered." And oh, do you know an upholsterer? Yeah, I've got a guy. And then, the cost of the chair, like the upholstery might be $600, and then the repair work might be $800. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is now like a $2,000 chair. And the principle behind it is great. Get that chair going again. It could be really cool when you fix it up. But if someone's just driven by their sort of dollar interest in the item, you kind of just have to go, look, maybe you should have a crack at doing it in your backyard or something. But if you're willing to commit and invest, we'll do it right and do it well, and it'll be amazing. But, and it's just another one of those conversations I guess you have.
So I've actually got a good story. I can't believe I haven't shared this on the podcast before, actually. So Scotty from the Timber Shack, Julian? Scotty? Yeah. I think, yeah. So Scotty passed a job on to me that I thought was a wind-up. So it was a guy wanting to make some BDSM furniture.
Okay, yeah.
For his dungeon. Nice. And I'm like, Scotty, come on, this is definitely a wind-up. He's like, nah, the guy's legit. He's called me on the phone, so this guy emails me. And I'm like, do you know what? In some ways, it could be quite an interesting job. Like, you get to make something you've never made before, and maybe it might be really cool and, like, bizarre piece of furniture.
Yeah.
So I make contact with the guy, and I'm trying to work out what his budget is. And he sends me through some photos. And, they were mildly disturbing. But he said, we could either make one from scratch, or I could just buy a chair and you could cut a hole in the bottom of it. And I'm like, nah, dude, I think I'm out. You might want to just do that yourself.
Wow.
Oh my god.
So that's
as bad as being asked to make a coffin for someone who's still alive.
Yeah. I actually saw a really nice documentary an English maker had done on making a coffin. His grandmother had commissioned him to make her coffin.
Right.
And she used it as a coffee table for like 2 or 3 years or something. I think she was terminally ill at the time. And she wanted to use the piece of furniture and sort of acknowledge the fact that she was going to be buried in it.
Wow.
Like,
That's funny.
in some ways it's morbid, but in other ways it's kind of cool that it's not just making a beautiful coffin to then bury and rot in the ground. Like, it, you know, it had a bit of use.
Yeah, that's true.
It always pisses me off. I hate coffins.
I reckon we'll have we need to see more modern ones.
Yeah, we do, but they just need to be simple. Like,
no, that's true. I think the cardboard type that might be, you know, be full of tree seeds or something like that, where it'll just, you know,
like what a fucking waste.
Self-compost
all
or whatever.
That lacquer and
no, it's crazy.
Oh my god, drives me mad.
Especially when you just end up burning it. But yeah.
I mean, at least with BDSM furniture, you know it's going to be used.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny you say that.
Guarantees on breaking the legs off the chairs and stuff.
There was a time years ago when a friend of a friend her job was she worked as a mistress sort of thing. I think there's another name for it, but in that field,
like a dominatrix.
Yes. Yeah. And real character and when I used to make paddles a lot in the earlier days, I remember her asking me, would you consider making some for my practice? And it never eventuated, but I was like...
Serving paddles being used as spanking paddles?
Absolutely, because that's what... I mean, my serving boards kind of look like that. They're a bit, you know... but I figured you'd just probably drill a few extra holes in them just so they're aerodynamic and, you know, if the order had been right, it may have happened, but it never did.
For anybody who's listening is wondering, has Robin fallen asleep? His internet's died and he's going to be kicking himself. He's missing all this chat. But yeah, it's funny.
Julian, what were you going to say,
I was just saying it's funny, like, how things like that just turn out. Like, because... I don't know. Like, that's the sort of thing. Like, say you were to just specialize in making furniture for like high-end dungeon people who want it.
Sure, like, there's money there.
I'm sure there's huge money there, just not this guy.
Yeah. I was going to say, Julian, we've got a few minutes left. What's the future looking like? What kind of workshop have you got now, and are you planning to upgrade? Are you comfy where you are? Have you got big plans to expand?
It's always the big question. I'm pretty happy where I am at the moment. I've got a handy sort of setup. I probably use my workshop is about 110 square meters, but I sort of bleed out a little bit. I'm in quite a big factory, but I'm the only maker there. And the rest of the factory is like a roller bearings business. They make sort of architectural products that go into doors, sliding doors and things like that. And so I sort of, I guess 110 to 130 square meters, which is good. But there's definitely a few things I'd like to upgrade. I've been looking for ages for a decent sized jointer. I've got sort of a little 10-inch jointer, which has been great, but I sort of need a longer bed and probably go a bit wider, maybe up to 350mm wide or something, or maybe 400 even would be cool. I saw an awesome one on the Facebook Marketplace yesterday. Beautiful big Delta one. But anyway, so look, there's a few upgrades I'd like to do. I'm a table saw guy as well, so I've always worked off a cabinet saw, table saw. But I sometimes think about it'd be nice to have both, like have a sliding panel saw and the table saw. And I'm sort of hoping in the near future to get, because I mostly work alone. I get help every now and again for deliveries and stuff, but I would love to have someone else in the workshop. I've seen over the years how Brian's had, different interns and things, and just I can always see how that, and even when I used to share a workshop with my old workshop buddies, like it was just nice having someone there to bounce off. And so whether that's in the form of an apprentice or a skilled labourer of some sort would be great. I've been looking at that sort of happening in the second half of the year. And yeah, I don't know. There's always the question, Melbourne factories and stuff, unless you own them, There's always going to be a question of what happens in a few years. Like, do I have to move?
Right.
But I've been where I am right now since 2015, which seems crazy now. But yeah, like I think it's just a matter of making the space as usable as possible, especially if I'm going to bring someone in to work, and that means every time I go out and to see clients and stuff, that there's actually stuff happening in the workshop.
Gets done.
Yeah,
That's the best thing.
What about Joey? Have you got people working with you at the moment? Or?
Well, I have one full-time employee, but he is currently away with the old COVID, so that's completely stuffed up my last week and this week. So I've been trying to do the work of two men, which is a ridiculous, stupid plan, because I've got all sorts of ridiculous deadlines which are now thrown out the window. So I'm just, but yeah, man, I am fairly seriously thinking about a second full-time person, and I kind of don't want to do it just because I don't want to grow the business that much. I've been there before with other businesses. It's not fun being that much of a manager.
Yeah.
But it's also not fun tearing your hair out because you just spent like 3 hours of the day driving for a supply run or something. Whereas you could either pass that on to somebody less qualified or hire someone who is as qualified as yourself and get yourself off the tools a little bit more and be more of it in the designing pricing area. But it's a tough separation to make which way you want to go. And I'm actually leaning towards being more of a designer and pricing guy rather than being on the tools necessarily. But it's still something that I'm not sure that I can afford another pair of hands, but getting a first pair of hands just makes such a massive difference.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think for sure I share a similar view as in terms of I don't necessarily have a plan to go to 20, 30 staff in some of the other places that I've experienced. That hasn't ever been my goal, but I would like to find a way to create a bit more of a separation where I can focus on the customer relations side of things, a bit more of the design work stuff, and even put some more time into just extending my knowledge base. There's always new stuff and technology and all this sort of stuff that you really just have to make the time for, and potentially there's some ways to do that. So just see how we go.
Well, all right. Well, seeing as Robin's not here,
you're going to do the outro.
That's as good a place as any to wrap this thing up. Thanks for being on the podcast, Julian. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. No, thank you for having me. It's been I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for listening as well. You can find me at glencross.com.au and Glencross Furniture on Instagram. There's a profile at handcrafted.com as well. Lots of other makers there too if you're looking for some different types of custom work. And even if you want to dig deep, I might even throw a podcast in there. This one's been left.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot this.
No, that's all right. A shout out to my mate Jamie Neville Young as well. We started doing a podcast last year called "What Do You See?" and it was sort of an informal just chat about design and furniture and. What do you see when you see a piece of furniture and what does that mean? And we actually really have to get back to it and try and release some more. But anyway,
that was a lockdown project, wasn't it?
It was a bit, and we recorded quite a few episodes, so there's still a bunch in the vault, but we sort of got busy between the end of last year and lockdowns and haven't edited it and everything. So we'll see how we go.
Look forward to hearing the rest of those.
Sorry?
Look forward to hearing the rest of those.
Oh, yeah, thanks, mate. Well, I better get onto it. I've just put my foot in it. Yeah.
All right, have a good night, and catch everybody else on another one.
Cheers,
fellas.
Bye.
Bye.